With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
This is James O'Neill. Australia's government has acknowledged that the Bondi beach massacre, which killed 15 and injured dozens at a Hanukkah celebration, was likely motivated by ISIS ideology. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said the father-son attackers, Zahid and Naveed Akram, appeared driven by Islamic State teachings. Police confirmed ISIS flags and improvised explosive devices were found in their vehicle. Naveed had been investigated in 2019 for ISIS associations but was not deemed a threat. Officials now suspect further radicalization, possibly during a recent trip to the Philippines where they may have received military-style training. Critics accuse the government of focusing on gun control instead of extremist ideology, noting Zahid legally owns 6 firearms despite his son's ties to radicals. Resident doctors in England will launch a 5-day strike from Wednesday after 83% of British Medical Association members rejected the government's latest offer, which included expanded specialist training posts and reimbursement of exam fees but no additional pay. Health Secretary Wes Streeting condemned the walkout as self-indulgent, irresponsible, and dangerous, arguing it threatens patient safety amid record flu hospitalizations and what some call a superflu. He urged doctors to postpone the strike until January, but the union insisted the proposal was too little too late. Hospital leaders warned the action will cause serious disruption as the NHS faces rising flu cases, staffing strain, and low public support for the strike. The U.S. State Department will designate Colombia's Clan del Golfo as both a foreign terrorist organization and a specially designated global terrorist entity, imposing sanctions and criminal penalties. Officials say the cartel, responsible for cocaine trafficking, human trafficking, assassinations, and terror attacks, poses a major national security threat. The group, with an estimated 10,000 members, grew under leaders Giovanni and Otoniel, the latter extradited to the U.S. and sentenced to 45 years. President Trump previously issued an executive order enabling terrorist designations for cartels. The sanctions block assets, bar entry into the U.S., and prohibit material support. The move follows rising global cocaine production and Colombia's faltering total peace negotiations under President Gustavo Petro. President Trump filed a lawsuit seeking at least $10 billion from the BBC, alleging defamation and deceptive practices over a Panorama documentary that edited his January 6, 2021 speech in a way that appeared to urge violence at the Capitol. The BBC apologized for creating a mistaken impression, but denied defamation, noting the edit prompted internal criticism and the resignations of Director General Tim Davie and new CEO Deborah Turnus. President Trump contends the broadcaster put words in his mouth, possibly using AI, and intentionally manipulated the footage to influence the 2024 election. The lawsuit seeks at least $5 billion in damages per count. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage accused the Labour government of enabling state-sponsored child abuse by permitting clinical trials of puberty blockers on minors. Although the NHS ended routine prescribing of puberty blockers after the Cass review, it allowed limited trials, leading King's College to launch a study of 250 children aged 10 to 15 who will receive the drugs for 2 years. Farage urged Prime Minister Keir Starmer to halt the trial, arguing it violates the NHS duty to protect children. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage spoke about the anti-Semitic attack at Bondi Beach.
Harbour Bridge the next day. No, I think actually in Australia, of all the Western countries, we've seen fire bombings, we've seen threats, we see graffiti, we see a Jewish community in Sydney virtually under siege. So if there was any country in which it was going to happen, I'm sorry to say that Australia was top of the list.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
There is a problem with medicine, and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mold he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria, but it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share their results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
We live in a more dangerous world in 2025. The threat of antisemitism, as we have seen, is very real. Threats of other occurrences, such as the rise in the far right, which has also been identified, of course, by Mike Burgess, is also a threat as well.
The bizarre situation that, just like in the killing of the policewoman at the Capitol building near to the White House, people were Googling the name of both the perpetrator and one of the victims, the young woman, in Israel before the event. This is a very, very strange and as yet unexplained phenomenon. Secondly, it turns out that Naveed Akram was Googled 15 times in Israel yesterday before the mass shooting. Thirdly, Naveed Akram, I know about guns, as you know, Hoz. I know about weapons. I know who is a lunatic spraying bullets wildly, and I know when a trained marksman is taking shots at running people on the beach. And with a bolt action is a very difficult weapon for an inexperienced person to handle, and to handle to such deadly effect. Naveed Akram is an expert marksman. He handled the weapon exactly correctly. His shots were rapid but steady. There was no spraying, there was no wildness evident in his rifle action at all. This is a man who's done this before. Somewhere he's done this before.
Freedom of speech reigns here, people can say what they want. That's not the case in New South Wales. We don't have the same freedom of speech laws that they have in the United States.
It's Sharon Martin here from Sky News. Haven't you only fueled the anti-Semitism crisis by your aggressive rhetoric over the past 2 years?
We are here today to mourn all those who have been unforgivably. We are here mourning and giving respect to the community.
You have been at pro-Palestinian protests where they have
Shame
called
on
for
you.
intifada.
Blood's on your heads.
You have been
Shame
at
on you.
pro-Palestinian protests
You're a disgrace.
where there have been calls for intifada and death to the IDF. how does this lead to anything else other than the terror attack that we saw here last night?
Political correctness and fear that you will be accused of Islamophobia, of racism, etc., those are the pet things to hurl at you, to deflect you or to derail whatever you're trying to do. So don't be dissuaded by those things. Otherwise, more of this stuff is going to happen.
All right. Okay, you make a valid point, Sushant, and I'd like to thank all of you very much for being with us. We're out of time on this. Hopefully there will be more details about this horrific terror attack and what it was part of. Was there a larger plot? And just how vulnerable is Australia in all of this?
So you wonder just how vulnerable Australia really is. Australians were asked to take a side very early in the case of the Bondi terror attack. Who were the victims of this attack? Who or what was to blame? Those who jumped in early, such as Benjamin Netanyahu, grabbed the momentum, aided by Israel's chief media influencers in Australia, such as that. I was appalled at Avi Yemeni from alt or independent media, Sharry Markson jumping down. Are you ashamed of those protests? It led to the murder of these people. It was incredible how they jumped right away. Some pointed at the government's wrongful support of Palestinian statehood, and prominent Jewish groups and politicians called for immediate action against anti-Semitism, which you should. But to protest the killing of innocent people, I don't give a rat's. It doesn't make any sense. They are allowed to protest. The protesters did not pull the trigger. On the other side, many in alt media pointed to definitive signs of a false flag or psyop by Israel or globalist puppeteers, such as you saw just before. Fewer addressed the growing danger of radical Islam in Australia, supported by uncontrolled immigration and political cowardice. State government responses to gun control missed the point, as did the Prime Minister's reference to guns, anti-Semitism, and far-right extremist groups as key matters to address. Notice how they all grab something to never let a good crisis go to waste. Far less was said by all the above on how the multicultural policies pursued for decades by both sides of government are failing the Australian people and decimating our way of life. So what would most Australians following mainstream media or social media conclude? And we know how it can sway minds. Social media, with the cult following of some of the presenters, those that are ignorant to what's happening around the world for mainstream or legacy media. I'm going to chat about this because I have some very definitive views on this, and I'm not at all happy with the way this is transpiring. Dr. Ursula Edgington, she's an educationalist and writer. Stephen Tripp, Australians for Better Government, and Shalini Basin from the Brisbane East Side branch of Libertarians. Gentlemen or gentleman and ladies, thank you for joining The Big Issue. Can I just get your opinion, first of all, Ursula, from New Zealand, looking in? What was your impression of the reporting? And was it, I mean, I've never seen such a jump towards here's a chance for us to beat our chest and make a point.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's just a very tragic situation. My heart goes out to those victims and the victims' families. I haven't researched in detail the actual story, but the first thing that jumped out, obviously, compared to the New Zealand situation, was the coverage. You know, it was across the board. All of the actual live streamed footage that came from people's phones was promoted on every single legacy media platform. which in itself kind of, rings alarm bells, because this was a very traumatic event. And, in contrast to the New Zealand situation, for instance, the tragic incident at the mosque in Christchurch a few years ago, that there was an instant ban on anybody even storing the footage on a device. You would potentially be open to being arrested or whatever. So yeah, big contrast between the different coverage. And from my perspective, looking at through the lens of propaganda theory. So I'm looking at it, trying to look at it from an objective perspective rather than a one-off event.
It was interesting, Stephen Tripp, how the government and how social media were very keen to get rid of the footage because it was just, we're not grown up enough to watch this sort of stuff. The rest of the world could see it, but they wanted to get rid of it. One would also think if they wanted to get rid of it, as time goes by, it's a great chance and great way of rewriting history, isn't it?
You're right, Mike. Look, you were on my podcast a few weeks ago. We had a good chat, but the name of that podcast is Commanding the Narrative. And I named that podcast because this is what it's about. When we come to issues like this, when we have these tragic events, the political forces just want to command the narrative. They don't care about the tragic circumstances. They don't care about the grieving process that these poor people who have lost loved ones and now have to go through. And it's tragic, the story that happened in Bondi. I mean, I live in Sydney. I grew up going to Bondi Beach. I know every inch of that beach and the surroundings. I know exactly that bridge where they stood and they shot those poor people. I mean, this is what we should be focusing on at the moment, focusing on the grieving, focusing on the tragic circumstances of it all, and trying to work out exactly what happened. I mean, the police are still investigating this. We don't know all the answers at the moment, but already the narrative is all about commanding the narrative. Get it, whether it's talking about gun laws or talking about immigration or talking about Islamophobia or talking about anti-Semitism. All the different forces are out and desperately trying to get on top, trying to get to the top of the mountain to frame the argument in the direction that they want to go. And even Australians for a Better Government, we put a press release out yesterday and we had to try and command the narrative about this. And in the first quote that we put there is that we're loath to have to politicize this event. But unfortunately, this is the circumstances, this is the society that we now live in, where unfortunately we have to skip the grieving process and skip the investigation to try and jump on the narrative and sway it in the right direction. I mean, I'm very concerned that Chris Minns is talking about free speech and they're talking about reforming gun laws. I mean, I own a gun here in Australia. I'm licensed. I know the rigorous process that we have to go through to get guns, and I'm looking at that footage and I'm thinking to myself, how did these guys get those weapons? I can't get weapons like that, and I mean, I have a lot of questions about how they got so many guns, how they got those types of guns, how they got all the equipment that they used. That stuff needs to be investigated before politicians jump on and try and sway the narrative in the direction that they want it to go.
It's interesting, Steve. If you looked at the footage, when you look at George Galloway, he's a highly trained marksman in his accent, and others are saying he's a member of the gun club. But a good marksman. Well, I was with the, I think they're called the reserve in my time. That's when we had horses. But I fired those weapons. I fired scoped and all that sort of stuff. He did not fire it as you would having a scoped gun. I mean, he didn't aim. He sort of pointed it and got people because there were so many. So George Galloway saying he was a highly trained marksman was wrong, but he could have been trained, could have had some sort of training or radicalisation. And Shalini, I have to, because the opportunity for people to, or government or those pushing a point in today's society, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, less free speech, gun control, all that sort of stuff. It doesn't augur well, does it, for the future? And I think they are missing the point. I think we have missed the point we go on about, and it's terrible. But they are Jewish Australians or Australian Jews. Like if those that are from India or Indian Australians or Australian Indians, like Americans, American Indians, not as in the Hiawatha ones, but the other American Chinese, and same thing, Australian Chinese, but they're all Australian. And this is a terrible thing to happen. And sure, they were targeting the Jewish community. It's quite obvious there. But the opportunity to push their barrow, I have to say, I find that disgusting. What about you?
I mean, from where I'm seeing, we have seen this anti-Semitism for a long time, or for that reason, the radical Islamic ideology. And it has showcased its colors in a lot of different parts in the world, not just Australia. Had it been just an incident of a random shooting, it would have been a different study, different scenario. But given that there are so many clues which are so obvious to people who study, terrorism closely, you definitely see a pattern there. You see the object, the goal there, and so the objective is very clear. The target is very clear. Yes, but the core issue over here is that the person who was actually doing the crime was an Australian citizen, and those who got targeted were Australian citizens. What was their ethnicity background is secondary. So the damage has been done, and we have to take the responsibility that how is it that a child who's born over here, studied over here, has come to this stage of radicalization, which was unthinkable till this event occurred. So for those who want to counter the protests, they have a valid point, because we have seen in the past that protest sometimes becomes the ground of radicalization as well. As much as in democracy, everybody has a right to protest and voice. But the scale of the protest that we have seen in the case of pro-Palestine is something beyond the normal protests which we have seen in the past. So it has been politicized. It's not normal for senators to wear a kafia in the Senate and just, for others to not see what message they're trying to give over here. So there's so definitely we have to see over the period we'll know exactly more about it, but I don't blame those who are jumping to the conclusions either.
Yeah, I think and we'll look at the media too, because in the background you'll see there's puppets controlling the media, and I'm just thinking, if we have a protest, and a case in point here, look at the one in the Tommy Robinson one that had up to 3 million people in London protesting, and then they used old footage of a year or two beforehand to show you that it was a very violent protest, and then they focused on all sorts of the things that aren't savoury. And the same thing in Australia. Legacy media, and this is where the legacy media, I feel, show the ugly side, generally the ugly side, unless they are in favour of. So they're showing a very enthusiastic crowd, and I have to agree with you. I think a lot of it is bordering on not obscene, but it's not all that great. Having said that, they have that right. That's what separates democracies from other civilizations. They have a right to protest. They didn't create any trouble, even though we showed very enthusiastic people protesting. I find that to bring up the protest, as Shari Markson did, saying, do you have blood on your hands, basically? And she was getting into that Muslim politician who is an Australian, by the way, because you can't be from another country. She is an Australian and she's a Muslim. So the disrespect there and the racism there was just as bad, or Islamophobia was just as bad as the anti-Semitism in cases, because she attacked her, but she's an Australian. But to say that, are you satisfied now that your protest were the cause of this? And the protests were about the annihilation and the genocide. And this has been proven. It's not me saying it. It's what the UN and other nations say. They killed innocent people. And that was the point, what we're trying to make here, is that innocent people have been killed. Australians have been killed. Australian Jewish people have been killed. But they are people, innocent people, who have been killed, just as in Gaza, they were innocent people. So to say that you're protesting about my country, and by the way, it's not her country is Australia, but the country she admires from afar that has committed these atrocities, we have every right to protest. It doesn't mean we're showing any disrespect. It is not their fault. None of them walked out with guns and shot people. None of them at all. So I think we need to stick to the facts and keep the emotion out of it. Because what you have is, you have, from both sides, you have legacy media and independent media all going off willy-nilly, thinking that, well, what I say is right. No, tell it as it is. Tell it simply as it is. Don't bring in other issues. The marchers, none of them went out with guns and shot anybody. And I think that's abominable that you would even think that. We have two murderers that were obviously radicalised in some way, and all the reports coming through, but none of us know yet. Yet we're all happy enough, just like COVID, we're happy enough to give our medical opinion because we've seen it on either X or on Channel 9 or the ABC. Ursula, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I would like to just zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because, we are on the big issue here. Divide and conquer. It's been the number one strategy for, the globalists, whatever you want to call them, for generations. And to my mind, this is just another artificial creation of a binary. It's human nature. As a psychologist, educational psychologist, it's one of the things that I try to raise awareness of with my students is that awareness that there's complexities, there's lots of shades of grey. There isn't an us and them, although it is very attractive to people to cling on to that idea that, we are the in-group and they are the out-group. So thinking about the propaganda strategies, the rules are tell a lie, tell a big lie, tell it first, and repeat it often. So thinking about that carefully, we need to look at the headlines, whatever the incident is, and think about what we're being told even before any investigations, begin. And, Stephen was saying, we need to wait for the police investigation to happen, etc., etc. I think we probably already know, Stephen, sadly, what the police investigation outcomes might be, because the narrative here has already been decided in some respects. It's a deliberate attempt again to divide the people with the long-term objective of, for instance, as you say, the gun laws changing like they did here in New Zealand, which are already ridiculously stringent, by the way. As you said, it's a similar situation here. And surveillance cameras and digital ID, they're all the long-term aims of which this narrative forms a very convenient pathway to convince the population that for your own safety, this is going to be a good option, and looking around and feeling fearful, because we know that in a state of fear, we can't make good decisions. We can't see the broader picture. And so I'm afraid I'm a bit of a skeptic. None of us really know the details of this story yet. And I know Shelley's, mentioned the fact that the perpetrators were potentially radicalised. Yeah, they might have been. We've got no evidence of that at this moment. And so, yeah, treat everything with suspicion would be my advice.
That's why we need to wait for the police investigation, because we've already jumped the gun. We're already jumping into this. We don't know what the motives are. I think it's clear what the motives are, but how do we know? How do we know that they knew that this Hanukkah festival was taking place at Bondi? They might have jumped out of their cars expecting just to kill anyone.
Who do you mean when you say they, though, Stephen? Who do you mean?
I'm talking about the two shooters. So we're just assuming that the two Islamic shooters are targeting this Jewish event. How do we know that? There has been the police investigation hasn't been concluded yet. The guy the second shooter that's still alive, he just woke up from a coma last night. So has the investigation taken place? We are already jumping the gun. And maybe rightfully so. Maybe I think the motive seems clear at this point, but how do we really know? They could have just been going to Bondi because it's a populated area of Sydney. They could just be two lunatics going, "Hey, let's go out and kill random people today." How do we know that this was a targeted attack against the Jewish community? We're just assuming that at this point. There may be evidence. There may be, might be clear evidence, but we need that to be confirmed before we.
I don't think.
I mean, this is the statement I was making. When we were already jumping the gun before we have had the investigation come out and paint the true story.
I don't think we're jumping the gun. I think that's what Mike was pointing out. The legacy media, whatever the headlines, they are producing this story already, right? This pathway. That's what I'm saying. It's a pathway towards something, an outcome, a judgment, an us and them divisive strategy. So I don't think we're making assumptions. I'm certainly not making any assumptions, and I don't think anybody should. But
it gets down to, if you look at the reporting, it's so speculative, isn't it, Ursula? I mean, it's emotive, but it has this. Because nowadays you're taught as a journalist to give to impose part of you onto that story, so it becomes more human. If we do that, we miss the fact. We're missing the entire story. We're just putting it. We are putting out basically a glorified opinion piece, because we need just to report the facts. And so far, all I've seen is, and it changes. First of all, social media had the guy that was a hero. So far, he's worked at a fruit and veg shop. He's worked as selling cigarettes and an IT specialist. And what we're now hearing that he may be deported back to Syria or something like that. So none of this makes any sense. And I think that the media need to start treating something like this that is so serious. We need just to report the facts and look at a legacy media. To have Shari Markson do that is appalling. I mean, that was she was saying that the reason that so many innocent people were killed, and by the way, I wouldn't cry one iota of a tear if this guy fell off a cliff who shot all these people that's alive. I think it's terrible. But to blame people protesting, not only in Australia but around the world, which has been supported by the UN and other high courts, to say that they caused the shooting, and to have legacy media pushing it and Murdoch media pushing this absolute trash, it shows you that the reporting is just appalling, isn't it, Shalini? I mean, the reporting of this, is it an opinion piece or are they reporting the facts, Shalini?
Look, there are different opinions to it as well. And sometimes we have to look at examples which is happening in other countries. If we can't find an answer over here, because actually this is all new for us. This is the very first time we are seeing it being displayed over here in Australia. But if you see a pattern in UK building up, or even in India for that reason, you see this kind of a pattern wherein, youngsters get enticed to join these rallies in school, colleges on a regular basis. And as much as the intention might be the purest intention from the heart, you never know, there could be elements there that might be radicalizing some of these innocent minds. So to say that the world is all a good place, that is a false assumption. There are radical elements who take advantage of that innocence, that golden heart of the people to, go out, reach out, help the people in need. They could actually get motivated in direction. And it's just a matter of one single guy losing his mind and then going about and doing something. So are the protesters to be blamed? No. But to allow Hamas flags to be flown in those protests, I think that was a little too far. To just normalize the wearing of kafia in our society, I think that was a bit too far. To be ignorant of how radical Islam has been around the world, I think that is a little innocent. So yes, protesters are allowed to protest in democracy, and that's what democracy is. But pro-Palestinian protests, the way, the scale at which it happened in the last 2 years, the way it has been politicized as well, in my personal view, I think it's a little too far.
Yeah, I think the anti-no or no NGO, he actually was on a post the other day was suggesting that the world did welcome independent journalism because it was not tied by the apron strings to their advertisers or government directives or a narrative pushed by the owners of the particular media. But he also said the warning is there that these independent journalists, most haven't trained as a journalist. And so therefore, to decipher fact from fiction, it's a lot harder. And then they become emotive. But I see no difference, Ursula, between the legacy media and independent media, because the difference with the legacy media and independent media, and I said on a post on X the other day, is that legacy media, when they become number one, they do it on programming, and it's a popular choice. They, like Channel 9 could be number one for that particular time slot, but that is because of programming. When it comes to alt media or independent media, how it's organised is simply, I think, by assassination. They get rid of that particular outlet any way they can. And so therefore the other has a louder voice and the more followers, or so they think so. And then look at the followers. How many of those are real? We had a particular person working for us, and she had over 100,000 followers. And I know that she bought 2 or 3. And if I looked at one of her podcasts, she had 20. So there's 99,880 that aren't, that didn't follow her. So you wonder how much can we, or how can we keep relying on alt media, independent media for the answer to legacy media? What do you think, Ursula?
Look, I don't think, in my experience as an educationalist, I think most people, a lot of people, have got no idea how the media in all kinds of different platforms is manipulated. And my eyes have only relatively recently been open to this. Okay, when I first moved to New Zealand 12 years ago, I was aware of an environmental issue that I stood up against, trying to stop, and I was totally naive. I had no idea that the chemical industry was so manipulative in the message that we needed to get out to people, to raise awareness of the dangers, the genuine dangers to people's health in terms of this environmental risk. So over the years, obviously that has evolved incredibly with the use of AI, etc. And, just to pick up on something Shelley just said about the Hamas flags that were at a protest, okay, maybe not. I don't know. I've got no knowledge of what those protests were and who was there, etc. What I do know is that it's very easy for manipulation to happen in terms of the flag, a colour, the people that were there, and how that message is portrayed on any kind of platform. And so that, and going back to my point about telling a lie, tell a big lie. You've got to tell a big lie, right? Because generally, human nature, this is how propagandists exploit, and I think I've mentioned this on a previous podcast. How propagandists exploit human nature is because most of us think good of each other. We believe that, generally speaking, people are good. And so if you tell a little lie, chances are you'll be caught out because people will point it out. If you tell a big lie, people don't think that you're that, that you've got that much evil in you to say that. So tell a lie, tell a big lie, tell it first, because the first message is always the one that sticks in people's brains. And if it's a visual message on a media platform, especially a media platform that you might trust implicitly, and that might mean today an independent alternative media platform rather than a legacy media one, that is the message that will stick in your brain. It doesn't matter what other people tell you. That's the primary message. So yeah, people don't know, and what can we do? We've just got to try and raise people's awareness of these strategies that are very well known, well established, well used, but they're not taught in schools. The kids aren't taught them. The marketing people aren't necessarily even aware of them in universities. The University of Sydney, it's a challenge.
Stephen, it would seem that we have a major problem with truth, and the truth movement, which turned out to be a real. I've got to tell you, I wouldn't trust them. They're fantastic propagandist. That's what I think. Anyway, that's my own opinion. Because when someone gets on a pedestal and starts saying, "I'm telling the truth," everyone else is wrong. Keeps telling you that how great they are and how they're telling the truth. You've got to go. Doesn't really pass the pub test, because if you are telling the truth, why do you have to keep telling me that you're telling the truth? Are you telling a lie? Something like that. But our media itself, the reporting, and we're looking at this, independent media and legacy media are no better than each other. The difference is we know that legacy media, we know who pays, who signs their paycheck. We don't know that about independent media, and the reason why TNT disappeared, part of it was because we wouldn't follow an agenda. We were not going to do it. You see what happens? And we were really large. We had a lot. We did a lot too. We had huge numbers. We were 140 million a year. But you go to social media, because they didn't like us, because whatever we said they didn't like, because we always told both sides. We were regarded as being extreme. So we have legacy media on one hand, we have alt media or independent media on the other hand, and you're part of that, although yours are more of an opinion-based product. But how do we get back to a semblance of reporting the fact? For example, a terrible loss of life in Bondi. Terrible. Report that. They were Jewish people. Report that. It was a targeted attack on them. Report that. But when we start saying they were trained assassins out of a Marvel film or something like that, or Claude Van Damme was popping up, that becomes speculation. But the whole media landscape is just highly speculative. How do we get back to, because in our day, when Ned Kelly was around, we were always told, tell it as it is. And nowadays, not many want to do that, whether you're a Tucker Carlson or whether you're someone on the ABC. You all have your own opinion, your own narrative. So therefore, you're going to slant it. What's wrong with just telling it as it is, Stephen?
Look, I think this whole shooting has exposed a lot of issues that we have to have adult conversations about. I think it's exposed a lot about our country as well. And part of that is the media, as you've been talking about. And I've been shocked at the coverage of this whole horrible tragedy. I think the international media has covered this better than the Australian media has. I've watched some of the clips that you played earlier of international media holding the Albanese government to account better than the Australian media has done. So I think that's a big issue that we need to address and look at. But I think the other thing as well is just the information age that we live in at the moment with social media and all the information at the touch of our fingertips. I know when this event first happened, I jumped on X because I know that all the clips from people's phones are going to be uploaded there first, and you can see exactly what's happening in real time. And I think a lot of the influencers out there, the independent media and even the mainstream media as well, they fall into the trap of having to jump on the story straight away and put their opinion out there straight away so they can be seen as cutting edge or having the first say on it all. And that jumps the gun, as I was talking about before. Let's get all the facts on the table before we start to really analyze this issue. And they're having to rely on the speculation side of things just to be able to get their opinion out because they don't have all the facts at that moment in time. And one of the things I saw like straight after the event was all the influencers, their thumbnails were popping up on my YouTube page with all the answers supposedly. So I think that's a big part of it as well. They fall into the trap. They get a bit of success. They feel like we've got some traction here. People are following us. People want to hear what we have to say, and they don't want to lose that. They don't want to let someone else swoop in with the story before they can get it. And I think to be able to do that, you have to rely on the speculation side of things because you don't have all the facts yet, and I think that causes big issues.
And I think people have this, and it's a natural human instinct to want to be the centre of attention if you're doing that sort of stuff because that's why you're doing it. And especially when you've started out, we used to have a thing in radio called microphone madness, and you'd always see it. A guest would come in and put the microphone in front of them and they grab it, and it's like, I'm a star, or I'm on air, and people are going to hear me. And when TV camera, the same thing. They've got their phones, put it on the internet, and you've got 100,000 people have looked at it, and a natural reaction is to go, "Wow, I'm a star," and that's the experience part. When you and really, if you look at the social media or the independent media out there, they've only been doing it for a short while. And so they don't understand what it is to have that responsibility to be in front of the camera. Shalini, I have to ask you this. Multiculturalism, as in the US and even the UK and Australia, had always been a great part of Australia. I grew up in Mildura. We had the Greeks there and fantastic people, and we had the Italians who had introduced us to grappa, which is a terrible thing, but you do it because you were just being polite and ate the bread and cooked in the kilns and whatever. You have the Turkish community, had all that, and it worked like a dream. And the Jewish community, because there weren't many clothing manufacturers in Mildura, unless they made gumboots. But in Melbourne, my wife worked with the clothing industry, which is predominantly the Jewish community, and not a problem. The whole country was just rocketing along. It was a great way of showing how multiculturalism survived and was getting stronger. What's gone wrong? Why do we... I have a theory. I think, maybe you could educate me here, I think we've imported hatred.
I have to agree with you on this. Multiculturalism is beautiful and it works wonderful as long as people have their core values which are similar. So our Australian values, just the fundamental values, respect everybody, give everyone, their space, work hard. All those fundamental values are the core values. But when people sometimes bring their very rigid ideologies and then they form their own, conclaves, and they start to assume a lot of things, then it kind of creates this artificial distance within the different communities. And that distance between the communities can sometimes lead to breakdown of communication, a lot of assumptions sometimes, and it becomes a healthy ground for opportunists which have certain specific, whether it's a radicalization agenda, it just becomes the perfect ground for them to play their divisive politics, and brainwash and create, these kind of differences, it's basically multiculturalism can be a boon to the society, but if it gets played on the lines of Marxism, where the society is seen as being divided between caste, color, creed, and stuff, then it can become a problem in itself, because one sooner or later it gets hijacked with the political agenda, and that politics and culture and communities, it can become quite a nasty source as well. So that's where multiculturalism can be a bit risky as well. But as an immigrant nation, we have to embrace that multiculturalism is our reality. We have people from all cultures, and we have to just learn to be together, I guess.
Ursula, what about multiculturalism in New Zealand? And I'll do part two of this one too, because you had a terrible shooting. I think you had, 40 odd people were killed. And a particular video came out, said you can't see that because we'll arrest you and you'll be jailed for watching a video. So we have a clash of multiculturalism because it involved an ethnic community, ethnic part of New Zealand. So is government trying to control then multiculturalism, and is telling people who historically just don't like each other, telling them you must like each other, and if you don't, then you're racist, and so therefore we'll have laws for Islamophobia, or we'll have laws for anti-Semitism. But really, if you look at history, they haven't been very, very happy with each other for many, 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 many years. And we're trying to impart Western values and Western culture on cultures that are way, way older than what we are.
Yeah, I mean, New Zealand is slightly different to the Australian situation because we have had this sort of synthetic narrative, overriding sort of narrative of biculturalism, which is totally unhelpful, right? Because for multiple reasons. So the push behind that is that the Maori people are supposedly indigenous people, and I'm not disputing that obviously their rights need respecting, but we do in realistic times now in the 21st century. New Zealand is a multicultural society, and Maori people are a minority, and often there are skilled migrants living in communities which are very large and do represent a large proportion of our population, deliberately so, because we do obviously have difficulties in filling jobs in certain skill types. So, this links again to what Shelley was talking about and Stephen in terms of the narrative, because I don't think we should forget that there is one narrative for a reason. There's not multiple different legacy or ulterior, alternative media outlets. They're not going on to X and, let's see what the latest is and I'll report it. And, this particular journalist is going to make a name for him or herself because of some unique story. That may have happened a few years ago or maybe a couple of decades ago. It doesn't happen anymore. That is a dream, of a journalist. The reality is that these media outlets now are owned by a global corporate company. I mean, Australia is a classic example. News Corp, what do they own? Like 24/7 Australia, Sky, the real estate platforms. It is centrally controlled. This narrative, I can't emphasize this enough. There is no authenticity to these stories. They are picked, they are delivered in a certain way. That's why we see the same phrases delivered over and over again from different countries. We saw it most obviously during the COVID era. This is, whatever that phrase was. What was it, Mike? This is really dangerous for our democracy, or whatever that.
Don't go near your grandma. Don't go near your grandma. That's all I can remember.
Yeah, so it's an illusion. Basically, it is an illusion that people have, and they in all good faith they take it on and they accept that it is an authentic story, but it's not. Unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, it's somehow twisted. There might be some truth in it. The best lie has always got a little bit of truth in it, but the majority of them are twisted for a certain agenda.
Just on that one, before I get into Stephen, interesting in the UK, they're pushing now that they wear masks. And we know that they don't work, yet they're pushing it. And guess what? People are wearing them to protect their health. They're never meant to work for the person wearing it. They're supposed to protect.
They're scared. It's the fear. Yeah,
but they don't work.
They
just don't work. Stephen, just as we're winding this up, I just want to know your thoughts on, because you are looking for better government in Australia. I don't think we'll ever get that, but the tension and the stress within this country, even way prior to that massacre at Bondi, but the tension and stress that we have from our government, whether it's privacy, whether it's you can't say this and you can't do that, and just enormous pressure on people. Do you think that has a part to do with where we're at the moment, and part of the reaction from media towards this massacre in Bondi? Because I've never felt in my life a place that's so large that feels so small.
Look, I mean, there's always a silver lining, and you might be scratching your head going, where's the silver lining in this horrible tragedy? But I think we are going to be doing a lot of soul-searching in this country after this incident. And there's a lot of issues we're going to have to start questioning, and government is one of those issues. I think another issue is culture. What culture do we want to live in this country? I think we've been led astray a little bit with the multicultural narrative, because that says we're a whole collection of different cultures. But I think we need an overarching Australian culture. And what is that Australian culture? And I think part of that is being able to go down to Bondi Beach on a Sunday afternoon and not have to deal with what happened on Sunday, not having to look over your shoulder and to see if terrorists are running up behind you. We don't want to live in a country like that. And I think that's why it stirred up so much emotion in people, because they're going, we're losing our country, we're losing the nation the safety that we thought that we had here in Australia. And a lot of that is the culture, the fair go. You want to look after your mates. You don't want to kill them. You don't want to slaughter people in the streets. You want to get on with people. You want to build everyone up, and we're building up a country together. So I think we need to define ourselves. I think we need to redefine ourselves, and I think we need to start questioning our system of government as well. And that's what we're trying to do at Australians for Better Government. And the press release that we put out yesterday was all about that. We've seen multicultural policies from both sides of government for, say, the last 50 years. We've seen mass immigration policies, and they have brought a lot of benefit for the country, but they've also brought consequences. And one of the consequences is what we saw on Sunday, and some of the conflicts that we're seeing between some of these different cultures and races that have come into the country. And do the Australian people accept that? Do they think that's acceptable? They've never been asked. Australian people have never been asked on whether we accept multiculturalism, and we've never been asked whether we accept the levels of immigration that are coming into our country. And Australians for Better Government are proposing that the government should be required to go to the people and ask them through a plebiscite what should be the adequate intake of immigration, and do we accept multicultural policies. And the Australian people might turn around and say, yes, we do accept the consequences of multiculturalism, because it does bring a lot of benefit to our country, and we're willing to accept that trade-off. But they've never been asked. And that's what we need to get back to. We can't rely on the politicians anymore, because the politicians have got us to this point, and the lack of leadership that we've seen by Albanese is incredible. I mean, I'm almost disgusted by the fact that he went down there the other day and didn't even take questions from the media. And we saw Pauline Hanson do that. We've seen other politicians do that. Even Marine Faruqi, took questions from the media there, whether you disagree with her or not. But we need to do a lot of soul searching in this country. I think that is the silver lining of this. I always try and look for the positive out of it. Obviously, it's a tragic event. We do have a lot of mourning still to take place, but we do need to answer some big questions. And I think we need to have adult conversations like we have today to be able to get there and to move forward.
I think just an answer. I think those two shooters, they're two individuals, and it's like saying the sovereign citizen movement, if there is such a movement. Desi Freeman, when he shot killed those policemen, and which is very odd they haven't even found him yet. Shot 3 policemen, killed 2. It's not the whole inverted commas movement. It's not their fault. And the same thing with the shooters at Bondi. Sure, they may be, well, one was Indian, so both are Indian, but they might have had Middle Eastern leanings or whatever. It doesn't mean a thing when it comes to being responsible for that, that entire community. I think that's just people jumping on the bandwagon and deciding to point the finger and backing up their own bias.
Even the gentleman that jumped in and took the gun off him, he was Islamic, he was Muslim.
That's right. That's
so
right.
There's good and bad everywhere.
Now we have to go. I just want to ask, and you got 15 seconds, by the way, Shalini, just quickly, how do we fix it?
I think we need to have an open discussion. As we just said, we need to have more adult, mature discussion, and we need to have more engagement from citizens into the parliamentary policies, rather than it being just one-sided direction and being decided by a small group on the top. We really need to, take charge of this democracy and be actively participating in it, not just by giving votes and forgetting. The country has been on an autopilot for too long. I think it's time Australians wake up and they take charge of it.
I've got to thank my panel very much. It's a bit more than 2. Normally we have 3 this time, but I think it's worth talking about, and we need to continue to keep talking about it. That's the idea of independent media. You talk about it, which legacy media doesn't really support that, as one of our next guests, Palinero Taylor, has worked both areas, and he would agree totally, I would think so. Dr. Ursula Edgington, educationalist and writer, Stephen Tripp, Australians for a Better Government, and Shalini Basin from the Brisbane East Side branch of the Libertarians. Thank you very much for being part of this show, The Big Issue, here on The World Today.